Okay guys, here we've got the Yanmar with a famous SD40 or SD50 Saildrive, which has got the notorious cone clutch issue. This is a installation that's been done quite a while ago, over 1,500 hours on the upgrade. Really you can't see much of a difference. The only difference that you can see with the kit installed is that breather system and the adjustable set screw with a lock nut on the gear selector. For the rest of it, everything looks standard, and we will show you how this whole thing goes about on the mock-up that we have available on the rest of the video. We've got a mock-up for you guys right here. We're going to describe the procedure and the upgrade and the benefits of the upgrade on the mock-up. But before we do that, let's just quickly have a look at the tools that we need. You need a ratchet wrench with a 13mm socket. You need a 13mm ring open-ended spanner, a 12 of the same and 11 of the same. The 12 and the 13, the 12 is used on the SD40, the 13 on the SD50, only difference. Then you also need a 4mm, either a Allen key or an Allen tool that fits in a little ratchet. You need a spare 8mm bolt, there will be some as you take it apart, or a lifting eye, very handy, you'll see where we use it later on. You need a large adjustable wrench. You need a 27mm socket with a power bar, or a 1 1/8 socket, same thing. An aluminum drift comes in very handy. A hammer, a side cutter, a pin punch, a Phillips screwdriver, a large flat screwdriver, some grease, lubriplate or any sticky grease, and then a Dremel tool with a grinding head and a cutting disc. The oil you would need is the Quicksilver API GL4, important, the GL4. We're going to show you now how to drain the oil. It's very easy on the SD50. Take out the dipstick, insert the pipe as far as it will go and pump out the oil, approximately a quart. On the SD40 it's a little bit more complicated. Remove the fitting down the side below the selector. If you don't have the Yanmar fitting to screw in the upgrade kit, you'll get a little brass fitting that comes with the kit. Screw it in, attach the pipe, pump out the oil. Doing it this way, you're going to remove more than a quart of oil. The reason we want to remove the oil is we're going to remove the selector and we don't want the oil to spill. Next step, remove the top cover. Undo the 4 bolts, lift off the top cover. Then we need to disconnect the selector rod or cable from your control system onto the board. Take off the little fitting. This comes off with a cable. And now you're free to remove the selector assembly. I've obviously undone most of these before the time just to make it a lot easier and quicker. Once the selector assembly is out, be careful that the shifter doesn't jump out. It's spring loaded. Keep it as an assembly. Using the 13mm on the SD50 open-ended tool, or the 12mm on the SD40, back up these 4 horizontal nuts between the bell housing and the gearbox. back them up right to the end of the threads. Don't unscrew them completely, just back them up. These are the 4 studs that hold the pinion, which is the drive from the engine, in place. This has been shown many times by other people. It's not very difficult. Use the little drift bar, tap on it equally. Don't force it. And move the pinion all the way towards the engine. Once that is done, we should be able to lift the cone clutch assembly out. Easy way of doing it. By now you have got some spare bolts. You can either insert the bolt at the top and pull it out, or even better, screw an eye bolt, screwdriver, and out comes the cone clutch assembly. This is the complete SD40 or SD50 cone clutch assembly. Okay guys, the Saildrive's upgrade kit consists of the following components: the instructions, a go no-go gauge, lapping paste, Loctite, a cleaning brush for the drive cone, a shim holding tool for the reinstallation, a setting up clamp assembly, some sandpaper to work the top nut down, a spline holding tool to hold the famous spline to take the difficult nut off, some zip ties or cable ties, a vent system which has got nothing to do with the slipping cone clutch, it's just an improvement, an end filter for the vent system, a 10mm barb fitting for the vent system, a little clamp to clamp the hose onto the barb fitting, the set screw and lock nut for the selector adjustment, O-ring for the top cover, O-ring for the selector, and small O-ring below the top cover. Important parts, which are the major change: 2 thrust bearings, a new top nut, a new lower collar with a taper lock assembly, and the actual taper lock assembly. The most important components here is the lower collar and the taper lock assembly that replaces the original C-clips. We'll see more about that when we've taken the used cone clutch assembly apart and see why this has become necessary. Okay guys, now we're going to talk about the cause of the problem, what causes the slipping on the cone clutch on the SD40 and the SD50. Essentially, there's too much play on the vertical shaft, caused by a couple of things: wear, and also the Yanmar copper washers, and also the limited travel of the selector. There is too much play on the vertical shaft on a used system. You can clearly see the nut and the washer moving up and down as I push and pull the shaft. Secondly, the gear selector has got very limited movement from the neutral position. That is full stroke either forward or reverse, full stroke forward or reverse. If I get anything past the stroke, the shifter retracts into the rest position, which makes the V part pull away from the drive cone, and before the drive cone can make firm contact with the cone cups, it retracts and it causes slippage. There's an adjustment on the selector that we'll get to, and we're going to adjust the cone clutch assembly by fitting the new parts. Right, now we're going to show you how to take the cone clutch assembly apart so that we can access the different parts, so we can show you where the wear develops, and also how to install the upgrade components. The detail of installing it comes with the instructions that forms part of the upgrade kit. It's like 11 pages. So for now, just a short one. It's handy to have a Dremel with a cutting disc to cut the lock on the original nut away. The nut comes with a lock ring that gets pinned into place, and that needs to be cut away. Once that lock is cut away, quite a simple operation. With an upgrade, you get a special aluminum spline holding tool, slides over the end of the shaft. Large adjustable wrench, or a vise if you have access to a vise. Remember, it's left hand thread. Turn it the right way and you undo the top nut. Now this is a lot easier than what it is in real life, but trust me, it can be done. We've done many of them. Right, once we remove the top nut, the assembly can be taken apart. The two lower seat clips and the lower collar. Before we go any further, have a look at the copper washer, the Yanmar copper washer. These are from used units. You can see there was hardly any movement on this. I'll explain to you where the rotation happens instead of happening where it should happen on the surface of the copper washer. It actually happens on the seat lips. Hope you can see this clearly. There's a definite smooth shiny surface on the seat lip. And also a shiny smooth surface on the inside of the locking groove on the lower collar. I'm going to slightly reassemble it just to show you what happens. So when Yanmar's got this assembled, the easiest path of least resistance is where the rotation takes place. In this case, the rotation takes place between the shaft and the collar, instead of the rotation taking place between the collar and the copper washer and the bearing. This leads to wear on the groove on the shaft, on the seat clips, and on the lower collar. The upgrade replaces the copper washer on the lower collar, which has got high resistance, with a thrust bearing. And the seat clips, if you can see the profile, part of the original seat clip profile gets replaced with a taper lock. Taper locks fit inside the lower collar, grips on the shaft, and when it rotates, the lower collar and the taper locks and the shaft rotate as a unit, and the rotation is transferred onto the bearing instead of into the groove. So that eliminates the wear on the lower part and the lower part of the shaft. The same goes for the top. The original unit has got the top nut with a copper washer. You can see there's been hardly any rotation on this one. We replace it with a new top nut with a bearing, and the rotation happens between the bearing and the bearing surfaces. This essentially takes care of the play. Remember how much play we had on the original unit? You could see the movement. This is a unit that was set up. It's a fraction of a millimeter. There's no movement. In the upgrade kit, you get supplied with the correct feeler gauges, with the correct dimensions to set it up correctly. This is essentially the reason why the cone clutches develop slipping or wear. There's too much play on the horizontal shaft, combined with the limited travel of the selector assembly. The cones don't make contact in time. The shifter retracts away from the cones by then had not made firm contact and they start slipping. That takes care of this part. Further to that, there's also a small upgrade that we do on the actual selector assembly. Right, now we've covered the upgrade components of the actual cone clutch assembly. There's also, like I said before, a small upgrade on the actual selector mechanism. The background to this whole thing, the Yanmar unit gets supplied with this Allen head screw and what looks like a washer underneath. The upgrade procedure described by Yanmar calls for this to be removed, a depth measurement taken, a formula applied to determine the thickness, which is not a washer, of the various shims that I've just removed, which look like a washer. Well, I've done quite a few of these units and I've never come across one where anybody, not even the agents, has actually done the adjustment. So what we do now, we replace that and make it a much more simple operation. We put in a grub screw, an adjustable grub screw with a lock nut. In the detail described with the upgrade kit, once this is in position, back in the boat, back in the drive, the adjustment gets done on the boat because each and every drive is unique. It's quite a simple operation. It's a matter of holding the Allen grub screw. Once the correct position is determined, just locking the 13mm nut, and that's the end of the story. No need for measurements, no need for applying formulas, no need to remove shims or add shims, which nobody does in any case. And this can even be done with it installed on the boat and at any one stage whenever it's necessary to do that. Plain and simple operation. Right, once the upgrade components have been installed in the cone clutch assembly, we're then ready to reinstall the cone clutch. I want to talk to you about that. I also want to talk to you about the oil. In the upgrade kit, there's this big zip tie that gets applied. This zip tie gets zipped around the shims between the upper and the center part of the cone clutch assembly to guide them in place, essentially like a ring squeezer. Same old story, we take the cone clutch assembly, making sure that the round hole lines up with the selector opening. Wiggle it into place, all the way down, and remove that. Now the cone clutch assembly is in place. We make sure that the selector opening lines up, the round hole in the selector opening lines up. Take the selector, making sure the larger part of the taper, like a wedge shape, points away from the engine, towards the engine, away from the engine or motor. Install it into that assembly, pushing it into place. Screwing the mounting bolts, do not force them, it's a simple operation. Once they tightened in place, that is all done. The detail setup on the selector and the cone clutch assembly is described in the instructions. It's not complicated, but it takes quite a bit of time to describe. It takes taken care of in the instructions. Part of the replacement here, the little O-ring, part of the kit replaced with a new O-ring, the top cover, new O-ring, install the top cover in position, and then we talk about the oil. Like I said before, the correct oil to use is Quicksilver. This is what Yanmar recommends. The API GL4, not the GL5 or higher. Yanmar's got different dipsticks, so the oil level is determined by the dipsticks. Yanmar had short ones and Yanmar had long ones at some stage. Once the vent system is installed, there is no need to worry about a long or short dipstick. Fill the oil to the bottom of the screw thread on the dipstick. That's all you need to do. On the SD40 it's a little bit more complicated. You'll have to determine approximately 50 millimeters, so 2 inches below the top of the cover, because remember on the SD40 the dipstick screws into this opening. A little bit more complicated. The SD50 much easier to see the level. Fill the level there. You'll also find that filling the oil is now a lot easier because of the vent system. You don't get air pockets developing because it breathes. Plain and simple. The next component, which is part of the upgrade kit, has really got nothing to do with the slipping cone clutch. It's purely an enhancement of the system. It addresses some of the problems that do develop regarding leaking oil seals. We're changing the seal system. The Yanmar has not got a vent. It's a sealed system. The oil and the air gap, it can either be under pressure because of the heat and the friction, or it can be under negative pressure because of the cooling down, which puts strain on both the lower seals and also the seal on the pinion shaft between the engine and the drive. So what we do, we create a vented system, an open-ended vent system. That means when the drive heats up and the oil expands, the air pocket can vent, and vice versa. When it cools down, it can suck in air instead of sucking in water or blowing out the oil on the drive when it heats up. It's quite a simple operation. Remove the existing screw on the top cover. Keep it. It also fits at the bottom of the Saildrive as a plug. Fit a little 10mm barbed fitting that's supplied in the upgrade kit. Push the 1/4" hose onto it. That's part of the upgrade kit. There's a little clamp to clamp it down. There's an end filter that fits on the end of the hose, and route or route the hose in an always upgoing movement, always upgoing shape or path or trajectory. No low loops or anything, as high as possible. There's no oil that goes into this. It is purely just the air going up and air going down. And this takes care of the vent system. There's even some zip ties to tie it on. Oh yeah, and the last thing, the 11mm open-ended spanner. It's got an 11mm fitting to tighten the barb fitting. That is as far as the vent system is. Okay guys, the last thing we're going to talk about is another enhancement or improvement to the Saildrive on the lower gearbox. Nothing to do with the cone clutch. It's purely about the seals at the bottom, where most of the time the water ingress is. The standard Yanmar lower drive seal is a single lip oil seal or shaft seal. We replace that with a double lip. Lip on the inside, lip on the inside, and a lip on the outside. The double lip seal, advantage there, we've got 2 sealing surfaces. Secondly, it also spreads the load. Secondly, the standard Yanmar seal, as you can see, is a metal seal. Keeping in mind that the seals are fitted back to back, this metal part actually faces the salt water, and the opposite side it faces the oil. No problem. This side is prone to corrosion. Although the spring it's fitted is a stainless steel spring, they still corrode away. The unit that we fit is all rubber coated. It's also got the spring. We remove the spring, which is prone to corrosion, and we replace it with a compressible O-ring. So we now got double lip seals, one facing out, another double lip seal facing towards the oil, back to back. It's a much better sealing system, not prone to corrosion, a much longer expected life. And also part of what we have are obviously the 2 big O-rings for the lower seal housing to be replaced. Like I said, this has got nothing to do with the cone clutch. It's just another enhancement of the SD50 lower drive.